អង្គុយចុះ អង្គនឹងជម្រាបប្រកាសបន្តកិច្ចដំណើរការនីតិវិធីសមាការនៅរសៀលនេះឲ្យជំរះធ្វើសមាការស្ដាប់សក្ខីកម្មសាក្សីដែលមានហត្ថនាម TCW 84 តាម
TCW 84 through video conferencing from France. Ms. Sakawati, could you report about the internet connection through France? Sakawati, the AV unit has already established the connection to France and the witness is ready to be testified. President, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. Good afternoon, Mr. President. President, what is your name? Answer, my name is Chao Sokun. Thank you, Mr. Chao Sokun. How old are you? Answer, I am 67 years old. Question, where is your current address? Answer, I'm living in France. Question, what is your occupation? Answer, I've been retired for more than 2 years. Question, can you tell the chamber your father's name and your mother's name? Answer, my father is Jiao Kan and my mother's name is Ning Chun, both of them deceased. Thank you. Question, Mr. Jiao Sokun, in your capacity as a witness before this chamber, you are required to take an oath or to make an affirmation based on your religion. Do you consent to it? Answered, yes, I do. Question, the greffier Sakawati, could you lead and to make an oath for the witness? Sakawati, Mr. Witness, please repeat after me. I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Witness, I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. President, thank you, Mr. Jiao Sokun. As reported by the greffier this morning, to your best knowledge, you have no relationship by blood or by law through any of the civil parties in this case, nor through any of the true accused. That is Noon Chi and Kieu Sampon. Is this correct? Answer, yes, it is. Thank you. Mr. Chao Sokun, as a witness appearing before this trial chamber, you may refuse to respond to any question that can incriminate you. That is your right against self-incrimination. As for your obligation as a witness, you must respond to all the questions put to you by any of the parties or any judge of the bench. And you must speak of the truth that you have heard, have recalled, or have experienced or observed directly of any event related to the questions that any of the parties or any of the judges of the bench put to you. Do you understand that? Answer, yes, I do. Thank you. Question. Mr. Chasukun, have you ever interviewed by investigators of the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges? Answer, no, I haven't. Thank you. We would like now to give the floor to Khieu Samporn's defense to put questions to these witness before any other parties. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes to do so. You may proceed. Kung Samporn, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Chao Sukun. My name is Kung Samporn, counsel for Khieu Samporn, and I have some questions for you. My questions are related to your personal background and that of Khieu Samporn. Can you hear me clearly? Mr. Chao Sukun, can you hear me? Chao Sukun, in fact, maybe you cannot hear me because I already replied to your question. Counsel, thank you. Mr. Chao Sukun, please observe a pause before you respond so that your voice will go through the interpretation system. Please observe a pause after the questions, otherwise we cannot hear you in this court. Witness, there is no red light on my microphone here, but I observe there is a red light on yours. Counsel, yes, please, when you see the red light is off from my microphone, you observe a slight pause before you respond. Allow me to put questions to you. Mr. Chao Sukun, can you briefly tell us about your educational background? Answer. I was born in 1946 in Svai Trong District, Mochuruk Province. In 1946, the place where I was born, at that time it was under French colony, and my native village was part of the Vietnamese territory at the time, but later on it changed to Mochuruk. When I was 7 years old, I studied at the Svai Trong school within the Svai Trong Pagoda. The French and the Khmer languages were taught in that school. When I was 8 years old, I came to study in Cambodia. I stayed with my relatives. And until 1958, I passed the exam to study in a college at a pedagogical school. It is still existing at the moment. It is located near the Independence Monument opposite the Lanka Pagoda. That was 6th grade at the time. It was a school for training teachers who, by the end of the study, go and teach at various colleges and schools throughout the country. While I reached the 2nd grade, in the old system, I went to study at Sisawat High School. At the time, it was known as Bak Dup. And then I went for a year study in scientific area, and then I got a French scholarship to study in France until I obtained my master's degree in the practical economics at the university in Paris. And after that, I became a public servant. Council, thank you. After you completed your study in France, did you return to Cambodia? Answer, no, I never returned to Cambodia. The first time I returned was in December 2002. Thank you. Question. Regarding your employment, can you tell the court what kinds of work you did before you retired? Answer. I worked at various places, depending on the short-term employment or long-term employment. Firstly, I worked in a printing house, and then I was the computer operator for making goods before I retired, and I was in that employment for quite a long time. Thank you. My next question is related to your political view. Can you please tell the court about your political view? Answer. Are you referring to my general political view throughout my life or a certain period of time? Counsel. It is your political view since you was at school until the current time. But this is just a preparatory statement for you, and then I would ask you for a specific period of time. And the question is whether you are willing to tell us about your political view. Answer. Counsel interrupts. Please just say yes or no. Answer. Yes, I can do that. Counsel, thank you. While you was a student both in Cambodia and in France, did you join any political activity or engage in any political tendency? Answer. While I studied in Cambodia at the pedagogical school, there was a teacher trainee who was more senior than me, and that student was of a progressive view. At that time, I was about 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and I like to hear those seniors' views. They talked about the society situation in Cambodia at the time, the living condition, etc. And later I left for France, and of course I learned quite a lot from that view from those senior students. And if you want any details in that, I can elaborate further. And while I was in France through obtaining the French scholarship, which was in September 1967, there was no coup d'etat yet in Cambodia at the time. Because the coup d'etat was on the 16th of March, led by Lon Nol. And by the time of the coup d'etat, a majority of the students who were about 25 kilometers from Paris in Oxay City, I had some Khmer students, and there were about 30 of them. And during that period of the coup d'etat, that is the 18th of March 1970, those friends of mine who were students and some friends who were in Paris joined together to declare our support for the FUNK. So at that time, we had our political stance firm, and we remained in that stance since. Council, thank you. You said about the progressive stance. Witness, I cannot hear you. Council, can you hear me? Witness, yes, I can hear you now. Council, you stated about the progressive view while you were at a pedagogical school. Can you explain further on this concept?
Hello,
Council, Mr. Chao Sakun, did you hear me? He's gone. President, Council, please wait. There is some technical problems with the internet connection.
Hello, welcome to the conference.
President, Council, you may continue putting the questions to the witness. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chasakun, can you hear me? Witness, yes. Council, before the internet was disconnected, I was asking you the questions regarding the progressive view while you heard about that at the pedagogical school. Can you elaborate further on this concept? Answer. I was a teenager back then. To me, the concept means to have justice in the society between the powerless and the powerful. That is just a general concept of that view. And that's how I understood it as a teenager. And those senior students talked about the situations in Cambodia at the time, and they were around 25 years old, so much older than me. They talk about the poor, the rich, and the capitalist and the businessmen in Cambodia. So the progressive view or stance was to seek justice and equality for the society. Council, thank you. Question. You said just then that you decided to support the front while you were students in France, and that was after the coup d'etat to topple something like Sihanouk. My question to you is the following. What reasons that led you to support the front? Council, Mr. Chasakun, do you hear me? Mr. President, I'm afraid the internet is disconnected again. President, Council, you may continue. Council, Mr. Chasakun, do you hear me now? Witness, yes. Council, my last question to you is the reasons that led you to decide to lend your support to the front after the coup d'etat to topple something like Sihanouk. Can you tell us the reasons of your decision to support the front? Answer. At that time, we as students to support the front and the reason was easy to understand. We were of the view that the toppling of Samdech Sihanouk was illegal. I mean, the coup d'etat was illegal, although it was backed by the United States. That was our primary reason. Secondly, the coup d'etat would mean the initiation of war in Cambodia. And these are the two main reasons. Thank you. Question. Did you know the main leaders within the front at the time? Answer. The front inside the country was led by Samdech Sihanouk. And there were some other important figures whose names I cannot recall, and they used to be diplomats who also supported the front, and there were several of them. And in Paris itself, there was a creation of an association, that is the United Front Association. And the chairman of the committee was Khan. I met with him as well.
Council, thank you. You mentioned about the front and its movement. To the best of your knowledge, did you know at that time that there was some forces inside Cambodia that supported such front or not? Response. After 1970, we received some information through news articles in French in France. That's part of the information we obtained. And we also received information from the radio broadcasts of the Funk. I don't recollect the exact year that I obtained this information, but at that time, when we were in France, we followed news from the Xinhua press, the Chinese newspapers, about the resistance movement inside Cambodia. So I learned of this movement through the newspapers, the Xinhua that I just indicated, and the radio broadcast through the Funk radio. Council, thank you. I would like to also seek clarification whether you knew Mr. Khieu Samphan already during that period of time. I mean, the period of time after 1970. Response. Until 1974, I heard of his name, but Khieu Samphan paid a visit to Romania, and we were in France, led a delegation to meet him in that place in 1974. I don't remember the month. We were delighted to meet him because we received information about the resistance movement in Cambodia that was established, and that was the first time I met him. It was in 1974. Council, thank you. Can you be more precise where you met him? You said that Mr. Khieu Samphan went to Romania. Did you see him in Romania? Response. We met in Bucharest, the capital city of Romania. I just don't remember the date. He led a delegation, a Cambodian delegation, to visit other countries, and Romania was also one of the places where this delegation stopped to visit, and we met in Bucharest. Council, thank you. How many people from your side were meeting Mr. Kilsampon? Response. I don't remember the exact amount of people who went from Paris, but there were about 20 people in total. And I remember the person who led the delegation was Mr. In Sokan. And from Cambodia, we knew that Kilsampon was leading the delegation. And I remember another person by the name of Tun Chut Saran, who was in charge of protocol, and he was also from France to meet with Mr. Kilsampon. Council, thank you. Can you briefly tell the chamber, please, now, what was the topic of discussion when you met with him at that time? Response. From France, we would like to know about the resistance movement inside the country, inside of Cambodia. I don't recollect the detail of the discussion, but I still remember some key points. Mr. Kilsampon provided some information to us regarding the aerial bombardments by the Americans in 1973. He talked about the casualties and the destruction as the result of these bombardments. And he also mentioned about the B-52 aircrafts that dropped these bombs, and the bombs did not discriminate their victims. So the tragedy was huge, and he talked about this tragedy. And secondly, he also reported to us about the resistance movement, about the progress that had been made, the movement that was supported by the population. And thirdly, as I remember, Mr. Kilsampon also mentioned that we had to do our best to make sure that the war in Cambodia could end so quickly. The war with the Americans and Lon must be stopped immediately so that we could rebuild the country now and into the future. That's what I remember. Question. Thank you. Did he also mention about how to end the war? Response. To end the war was to gather all the national forces to counter the Americans and Lon. That was the main point. Council, thank you. Were you aware of the victory by the FUNC on the 15th of April 1975? Response. Yes, I was, but everyone was taken by surprise because no one expected that the victory would be won on the 17th of April 1975 because everyone expected that it would take much longer than that. But we were happy to see that the victory was won over by the FUNC and the war was over that soon. Council, thank you. Upon knowing that the war in Cambodia was over, did you do something to follow the news about the development in Cambodia? Response. News we received was very minimal. There were very little mentioning of what happened in Cambodia after 1975 on the news. And I personally do not remember having read much about what happened in Cambodia because there was no information about this. Counsel, are you saying that the reason that you do not remember the event because there was little information back then about what happened? Response. I am talking about the information I obtained from the resistance movement. There was some form of information I received, but I am talking now about the information I obtained from the newspapers. There was very little that was said about Cambodia after 1975 in those newspapers. And it was not much covered by the media in those days. Question. Thank you. Did you also do your best on your part to see why there was some kind of missing information about the FUNC and its victory? After the victory, I mean. Witness, I think, counsel, you have to switch off that mic before I respond. If the mic is still on, I won't answer as you instructed. Response, I was suspicious. But I understood at that time that immediately after the victory was won in 1975, we knew that these people had to be bombarded or overwhelmed with a lot of tasks already, that they were too busy to concentrate on rebuilding the country, to communicate with other people in the outside world. Counsel, thank you. I now would like to talk a little bit about Mr. Khieu Samphan, because as a witness today before us, your main role is to testify on the character and personal conduct of Mr. Khieu Samphan. My question to you regarding this is that how much do you know about Mr. Khieu Samphan in terms of his character and conduct? Response. I heard about him when I was still at the secondary school. I heard he returned from France. He was highly educated and he was a parliamentarian. And the Secretary of State for the Ministry of Commerce. His reputation was known to everyone, not only me, and his qualification was also well known. Everyone knew him as a clean person, and I learned about him when I was 12 or 13 years old. And on top of this, when I was still in Phnom Penh during my youth time, I learned that he was mistreated because the secret police abused him, and we learned about a congress that was conducted when Mr. Khieu Samphan was stripped of his immunity, and he was removed from the assembly. And that's what we heard about him through radio broadcasts and from other people and from the news. I have learned a lot about him when time passed by. Counsel, thank you. As a person who had an education in economy, and Mr. Khieu Samphan himself also graduated in his major of study was in economy. Did you study the thesis written by Khieu Samphan? Response: Yes, I did. When I was in France, immediately upon arriving in France, I read his thesis, and I could remember that in that thesis he would like Cambodian children to prosper, and he would like Cambodia's economy to focus mainly on agriculture. And it is no doubt that during that time, Cambodia was not an industrial country. The country focused more on agriculture than on other services aspects. And we heard about the middle person, about means of commerce being mentioned in that dissertation written by Mr. Khieu Samphan, but that was more than 30 years ago, and I don't remember the detail now. Counsel, thank you for your explanation. Can you also explain further on the political tendency of Mr. Khieu Samphan after you have read his dissertation? Response: At that time, I believed that he was one of the progressive people. He would like the country to be a clean country, a country which has justice. And as a person who believes in democracy, I am not convinced that he would be a communist. Counsel, thank you. I have some more questions regarding Mr. Khieu Samphan's work and jobs. You appear to be testifying that you have learned something about what he did. My question to you is now, did you follow what Mr. Khieu Samphan did during the Sangkum Drih Niyom regime? Response: During the Sangkum Drih Niyom regime, I mentioned a little bit already that when I was still at high school, as a young man, I liked studying so much. Nonetheless, when I was the teacher at the institute, the National Institute of Pedagogy, I also read something about him. I knew that he ran a newspaper, and I knew that he also ran for the election as a candidate, and he was against corruption. And I heard from other people that during election campaign, he did not have the financial means to start his campaign, but he was fully supported by cyclo drivers and other workers. Counsel, thank you. After 1970, after the coup d'etat, did you have any specific impression regarding Mr. Khieu Samphan's performance and personality? Response: Everyone was surprised. Everyone, even people in France, were surprised. We heard rumor that Hunnam and Khieu Samphan were plunged into a basin filled with acid. And we thought that these people could have been dead because we lost information about them for quite some time. But later on, in about 1973, we saw him receiving then Prince Norodom Sihanouk and his wife, and we were happy to see him, knowing that they were still alive. Counsel, thank you. What was your impression or sentiment of support regarding your having seen him back again in 1973? Response: it is simple. I was convinced. I trusted him, and I trust him. He is a respectful person, a proper man who is clean. So these are the key elements of quality in him that we trust and respect. And during those days, there were very few highly educated individuals like him who graduated abroad and who returned to Cambodia to help the country. And there were even few people who highly educated and concentrated on fighting corruption, finding social justice, so on and so forth like him. Counsel, thank you. Did you know what Mr. Khieu Samphan did after 1970s? Response: so far as I recollect, when I met him in 1974, I remember him being the Minister of Foreign Affairs, rather of the National Defense. Counsel, would you wish to add something else? Response: no, not really, but he worked, because he was very popular. His work was involving diplomacy and the popular masses than the military matters, affairs. Because I can see that Mr. Khieu Samphan was educated in France in economy, not in military. Counsel, thank you. Did you hear in France whether Mr. Khieu Samphan ever engaged in the battlefield leading or commanding soldiers? Response: no, never. Counsel, thank you. Now, regarding the democratic Cambodia, I have a question for you, please. Can you distinguish between the Khmer Rouge and the FUNC? Were these two institutions different? Response: I did not understand the Khmer Rouge term very well. At that time, every progressive person would be regarded as a member of the Khmer Rouge. However, for the FUNC refers to people who were nationalists, those who would oppose the Lonol regime, those who really would like to support the country free of these Lonol people. And but I didn't understand the term Angkar. Response: you talked about Angka and that you did not understand the term. What about the term revolution? What is your understanding of this term? Response. Revolution was mentioned time and again during those days. We heard about this in France. But please allow me to tell this to the chamber that in May 1968 in France, everyone was concerned about this revolution. But in Cambodia, what I understood about revolution was to gather forces to free the country as soon as possible. Council, thank you. To your memory, what did Mr. Khieu Samphan do in Cambodia after 1975? Response. As I already indicated, after 1975, immediately after 1975, we lost connection. We lost information about this. But we learned that then Prince Norodom Sihanouk was no longer in power, and that Khieu Samphan was believed to be someone who was Prince Norodom Sihanouk's successor as the head of state. It was somewhere in 1976, if I remember correctly. Council, thank you. Do you know why there was such announcement that Prince Norodom Sihanouk had to resign from his post? Response. I was far from home at that time. I just don't know the real motive behind his decision. But I understood at that time that perhaps Prince Norodom Sihanouk was too tired with politics, or perhaps his health did not allow him to continue his current position. Council, thank you. You mentioned about meeting Mr. Khieu Samphan in 1974. Did you meet him on another occasion elsewhere? Response. I met with him on 3 additional occasions. The second meeting was... Council, yes, you may proceed. Response. Yes, after 1974, I met him on 3 occasions. The second meeting was in 1989. At that time, Mr. Khieu Samphan led a delegation to negotiate the Paris Peace Accord. And the meeting was very brief. We met him for 1 hour or 1.5 hours. And that was the second meeting. The third meeting was in December 2002. At that time, another friend of mine who conducted a Buddhist ceremony to commemorate the death of his son, and his son's remains was kept at a pagoda in Thailand. I don't remember the name of that pagoda. When the ceremony was conducted, Mr. Khieu Samphan attended. And after the ceremony, we had a meal together and we parted our ways. That was the third meeting. The fourth encounter was in December 2005 when I came back to Cambodia to visit my relatives who came from Australia and elsewhere. And during this time, when I was visiting my relatives in Siem Reap, I took the advantage of the opportunity to visit him in An Long Vang, and I was very happy that I was received by him. That's the fourth encounter, and if you would like to know more about this, I am happy to say so. Counsel, thank you. Can you explain to the chamber the personal conduct or character of Mr. Kyusumpon, and please tell the chamber whether his then characters and behavior or personal view were the same or different from those that you knew of him long ago. Response. At that time, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal was not yet established. He was still free to go places. I asked him a question. I asked him, whether he had any problem when he was traveling places. And then he responded this to me. This response impressed me. He said he had no problem traveling from one city to another because he was more like an ordinary Cambodian citizen. He could take a taxi or bus, and some people who knew him greeted him well, and some young people who also knew him shared the same public transport without any problem. So his popularity remains the same. And I also would like to pinpoint this, that when I met him in 2005, I took a photo of him. And when I arrived at Siem Reap, I asked one of my relatives who was about 70 years old. I showed him Mr. Kyusumpon's photo, and I asked him this question, whether he knew the person in the picture. And he said, yes, he was Kyusumpon. And a lot of people still loved him. That's the expression I learned from my relative, because that reflects what I still believe the quality in his popularity. So I can conclude that his popularity remains unchanged. And now a lot more people share their sympathy towards or with Mr. Kyusumpon, and they hope that justice will be served to him.
Thank you. Can you also tell the chamber if you ever receive any information or come across any news that Kyusumpon practiced or exercised a violent policy or made a decision either within the domestic setting or in the political arena? Answer. Through my understanding, Kyusumpon is a person of a non-violent nature. He's been a victim prior through 1970, and even after the Paris Peace Agreement, we in Paris saw him that he was attacked and he bled. His life was the life of a victim, and for that reason he could not be a violent person. And of course, to me there is no evidence indicating that he was a violent person. Counsel, thank you. I'd like to ask you regarding a fact that is on the gathering of intellectuals for their repatriation to Cambodia after the 17th April 1975, and as you were a former student in France. Could you tell us your experience or encounter regarding any propaganda to appeal to students to repatriate back to Cambodia? Answer. There was confusing news that regarding whether students were compelled to repatriate, or those people who came to work in France to force students to return. That is untrue. In fact, it was all the students, including myself, we applied for the repatriation to Cambodia. And on the form, we would fill in our name, our place of birth, our qualification, our family background, whether we had a husband or not. In fact, I also applied, but I was not yet interviewed for the repatriation. Of course, we were surprised the country was liberated from colonial government on the 17th April 1975. My eldest son was born almost a month later, and my wife was just delivered the baby, and probably that was the reason that I was not yet interviewed for the repatriation to Cambodia. And some of my friends were concerned that they would not be allowed to repatriate to Cambodia. Of course, we had very firm view. We were the front supporters, and of course we wanted to return to our Cambodia after the liberation. And from 1976, some of my friends actually repatriated to Cambodia. Council, thank you. Question, can you tell us a little bit further regarding your application to repatriate to Cambodia? Where did you lodge your application? Answer, in Paris, if I recall it. In fact, before the 1975 liberation, there was the FUNC. And after the liberation, that committee changed from FUNC to a new name that is for the Cambodian expatriate students in France. So we lodged our applications through this committee, and probably the application would go through the Cambodian embassy in France and then go through Beijing and then back to Cambodia. And allow me to repeat that at that time we were not forced to apply to return, but we ourselves willingly lodged our application. And in fact, I'd like to touch upon another point, that my wife was of a French nationality. Thank you. Question, can you tell us who actually made a decision which applicants would be granted for the repatriation? Answer, no, I did not know. But it is, my understanding is how many applicants that they could repatriate at one time. And in my instance, because my wife just delivered the baby, that's why I was not selected. Thank you. This is my last question. Do you have anything else to add regarding the characters of Mr. Khieu Sampon? Answer. It is my understanding that Khieu Sampon, and as I already stated earlier, is that the Cambodian people in Cambodia should be asked about him, about his character, whether he is a man of a violent nature or not. And if we selectively only ask a handful of people, then that is unfair to him. Of course, in any country, there would be a few extremists, and we cannot just rely on a number of these extremists to judge a person. Counsel, thank you very much, Mr. Chasakun. I have no further question for him, and Mr. President, I conclude my questioning time. President, thank you. Is there any question from your International Council? If not, we would like now to give the floor to the prosecution to put the questions to this witness. President, the prosecution, please wait a little bit because Judge Lavange has certain questions for this witness. You may proceed, Judge Lavange.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I have a few questions. If I understood what the witness said to you right up until now, he only met Que Sampon 4 times. And he has no element of information regarding Que Sampon and his role during the period of Democratic Kampuchea. And regarding the period prior to 1974, he only read information about him in the papers or heard his quote-unquote elders speak about Mr. Que Sampon. Is this what we must understand?
Good afternoon, Judge. I'd like to add that Mr. Que Sampon's responsibility during the period of 1976 in the placement of Samdech Sihanouk, I knew about that event well.
Fine. So I understand that you're telling us that, like many others, you became aware of the fact that Que Sampon was head of state, but are you aware of the details of his duties and of his activities during the period of Democratic Kampuchea?
May I speak now? In fact, what I observed was that the main role of Que Sampon was of a diplomatic nature, that he would pay visits to the United Nations headquarters or to various other countries in Africa, or to receive diplomatic representatives in Cambodia. That's how I knew of his role through my friends who were in Cambodia.
Did you have any contact with your friends in Cambodia? Or did you just get information through the international press?
The information I obtained was from both sources. It was firstly from the press regarding his activities, although I cannot recall the details, and secondly, when he made his trips through Africa, some of my friends would transit through Paris, and then we would speak on the telephone, so that I learned of his diplomatic activities back then.
So these friends you were in contact with, did they give you information that would allow you to question the political program implemented by the Khmer Rouge? Did you have any doubts about their concept of justice and democracy that you referred to earlier?
We did not receive that kind of information.
Did you read in the press articles referring possibly to information or to rumors regarding persecution or massacres which occurred in Cambodia? For example, did you read any articles from Father Panchaud, Father François Panchaud?
I did read it, and I also participated in the meetings or the hearing by Father Panchaud. He spoke about the evacuation of Phnom Penh's residents. And of course, I read from the newspapers in France, and the message was consistent with what was delivered by Father Panchaud.
When then you later met Kyosampan, did you ask him questions about these policies, about the evacuation of Phnom Penh, about the rumors of massacres?
When we met Kyosampan in 89, when he went for the meetings in anticipation of the Paris Peace Agreement, we did not speak in details regarding this matter, but we spoke about the immediate evacuation of people in 1976, 77 or 78, and we tried in fact to understand what happened.
And then what did Mr. Kyosampan say to you? Did he say that he disagreed with these policies?
He did not tell us his clear status, but it seems that he did not have any role in the decisions of the killing of the people. He was not in a position to make any decision. This is my understanding.
Witness, how can you say that Mr. Kyosampan was not in a position to make such decisions if you had not asked him detailed questions about such issues?
This is my personal understanding. And of course, it is the nature of personality of Mr. Kyosampan. Through me, he had no role to play in the decision making, because from 1976 we knew about the Communist Party of Cambodia, and we read information and books about the CPK, and that in each communist party, it was only the central committee or the one in charge of the military who would in a decision-making position. As for Khieu Samphan, he has no role to play. He was not in charge of neither the police nor the military.
And did you ask him if he had attended meetings of the standing committee?
I never asked him on this matter.
Well, now I would like you to speak to me a little bit about your activities, your personal activities in Paris in the 1970s and later. Were you in contact with the GRUNC diplomatic mission in Paris?
At that time, I personally worked as an active member of the community, but I was not a member of the GRUNC. Of course, we had our working relationship with the GRUNC, but I was not a member of the GRUNC. I worked for the community, for the association. As I said, the GRUNC in fact was initially known as the FUNG, but later on it's changed its name.
And then later, were you a member of what was called the Committee of the Patriots of Democratic Cambodia?
Yes, I was still a member of that committee.
Were you a member of this committee at the same time as a certain Mr. Chet Chopininto? I apologize for my pronunciation, but I believe he was the Khmer who was leading that committee in Paris.
I do not know which person you refer to, or the phonetic sound is not unfamiliar to me. It was Mr. Eun Suk Kan who was the chairman of the committee with some senior people, and later on Mr. Ngat Cho Prolung became the member of that association after the senior people repatriated to Cambodia.
Do you remember a lawsuit against the French magazine by the name of L'Express in the 1980s, following articles making accusations against a certain number of Cambodians living in France?
Yes, I know about this lawsuit very well because I actually attended the hearing of that case. L'Express in fact accused Mr. Ngacheng Prolung Cho because of the alleged wrongful report. But then the court found that this person, Mr. Ngai Chong Pinongto, actually won the case against the L'Express.
Well, in fact, this person was criticized by the Express for having written reports on Cambodians who wished to return to democratic Kampuchea. Can you tell us what the role was of this Patriots Committee? Was this committee in charge of bringing together the administrative documents to send them to the authorities of democratic Kampuchea before they could return to democratic Kampuchea?
As I stated earlier, Mr. Ngai Pinonto was the only recipient of the applications lodged by students who would wish to repatriate to Cambodia. And I myself actually lodged the application as well. And it is my understanding it is him who would transmit the application to the Democratic Kampuchea regime. Your Honor, you may continue with your question.
Did these documents also contain autobiographies requested from people wanting to return? And were there possibly other written reports that were also sent to the Democratic Kampuchea authorities?
As I stated earlier, I myself also lodged the application. The details of the application was about my personal biography, my name, place of birth, the number of children I have, and my wife's name. And there was no other requirements. For that reason, the L'Express who accused Ngai Pinonto of this allegation, and it was unfounded, and Mr. Ngai Pinonto won the case.
Witness, were you able to check the information that was sent to Democratic Kampuchea?
No, I had no role to do that.
Do you know, witness, when the last candidates for repatriation left for Democratic Kampuchea?
No, I cannot recall that, and I didn't know that. I sometimes, yes, accompanied my friends to the airport, but I did not do that all the time, so I could not know the last trip for the repatriation.
Did you get any news from your friends who left for Democratic Kampuchea? Did you have any doubts about how they were received when they arrived back in Democratic Kampuchea?
We in France did not receive that kind of information, and as I said, after 1976, there was no news coming from Cambodia. We were waiting for the news, but we received nothing.
And afterwards, in the 1980s, did you get any kind of news from your friends? Did you know if some of them had experienced the place called S21?
After the invasion by the Vietnamese troops in January 1979, some of my colleagues who left France fled from the attack by the Vietnamese troops, and later on they returned to France. And they spoke about the former students who repatriated to Cambodia. Some disappeared, and later some returned. But immediately after that, nobody talked or knew about S21.
And since then, Mr. Witness, have you heard about S21, Thang Tabek, or other detention centers?
Response. I heard that some of the detainees were placed at Bang Trabak, and I heard about S21 through newspapers articles, but my friends did not know anything about this.
And did you ask Mr. Kyo Sompong any questions on those matters?
Je n'ai pas eu de réponse. Je ne sais pas si...
I've not heard a response. Is there a technical issue? Or, Mr. Witness, are you able to hear me? Were you able to capture my last question?
The President, we have internet problem again. Please hold on.
Hello. Welcome to the conferencing.
The President, Judge Lavergne, you may now proceed.
Bien, merci.
Very well, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Witness, are you able to hear me?
Monsieur le témoin, m'entendez-vous?
Mr. Witness, are you able to hear me? Witness response inaudible.
The President. It is now appropriate moment already for the adjournment. The chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes. The next session will be resumed by 30 past 3. Mr. Witness, we may now adjourn, and if you cannot hear us, we believe that the Secretary of the Trial Chamber will communicate this message to you.